At the same time, we have overwhelming leverage over China. The Chinese economy, after all, is built on trade violation after trade violation, and that makes Beijing particularly vulnerable to the penalties that the Trump administration could levy, such as tariffs that might follow this Section 301 investigation into China's theft of American intellectual property. Now, many people say, oh, you know, we can't pressure China because that would just cause a trade war. Well, there are a lot of things that people can say about Donald Trump, but the one thing you can't say is that he can start a trade war with China. We're already in a trade war. It's only the Chinese who are waging it, and we are completely oblivious. In any event, even if the Chinese retaliated, so what? There are a lot of reasons why we don't have to care. First of all, last year we ran a goods and services trade deficit with China of $309.3 billion. Trade deficit countries don't worry about trade friction. And we Americans, out of everybody in the world, should know that. Because in the Great Depression and the trade friction, who got hurt the most? The world's trade surplus country, the United States. Second, the US does not have an economy geared to selling things to China. But China has an economy geared to selling things to us. Third, for all the faults of the American economy, and let me tell you, there are many despite the 3.0% growth for the third quarter, despite all the problems in the American economy, our economy is stable. China's, on the other hand, is proceeding slowly but surely to a systemic debt crisis, perhaps the worst in world history. And fourth, we can just push the Chinese around. Last year, our economy produced $18.57 trillion of gross domestic product. China's, in comparison, produced $11.39 trillion. That number came from Beijing, and it's almost certainly exaggerated. China claimed a growth rate last year of 6.7%, but the World Bank about a month ago, I'm sure they did this inadvertently, but they released a chart that showed that in 2016, the Chinese economy grew by 1.2%. Bigger combatants always have the advantage in trade wars, especially when the gap is this large. US, in short, we hold the high cards. And by the way, China is vulnerable for another reason. Chinese banks have been laundering money for the North Koreans, and by doing so, they've been violating federal law. The Treasury Department on June 29th designated Bank of Dandong, a small fry Chinese company, as a primary money laundering concern under Section 311 of the Patriot Act. That meant Bank of Dandong could no longer do business in dollars. That's the world's dominant currency. In the last general survey of currency usage in the world, which was conducted a couple years ago by Standard & Poor's, the greenback accounted for 51.9% of the world's transactions. Of course, Bank of Dandong is just a small fry, but we know there are other culprits, such as the Bank of China, one of China's big four institutions. This financial institution was named in a UN report last year for devising and operating a money laundering scheme for the North Koreans in Singapore, and it's clear that Bank of China has been involved in this dirty business in other places. But as big as Bank of China is, and it's the world's fourth largest institution as measured by assets, it is probably not the largest Chinese bank that has been money laundering for the Kim regime. That honor probably goes to the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, China's largest bank. If Trump were to enforce US law and declare one of these big banks a primary money laundering concern, it would essentially be a death sentence for that institution, and it might be a death sentence for the Communist Party itself. Got to follow the logic. If we designate Bank of China as a primary money launderer, that would mean that it would be mortally wounded. We mortally wound Bank of China, that puts the Chinese financial and banking systems, destabilizes them, especially if we designate other large Chinese banks for also being involved in money laundering. We destabilize the Chinese financial and banking systems, we push the Chinese economy close to the edge of the cliff. We push the Chinese economy close to the edge of the cliff, Communist Party can't be too far behind.